You don't suffer from a lack of intelligence. You suffer from invisible thinking errors that quietly decide your future. Right now, there is at least one area of your life where you keep asking the same question in different forms. Why does this keep happening to me? Why do I make the same mistakes even when I know better? Why do I understand what I should do yet somehow end up doing the opposite? You replay conversations in your head. You rethink decisions too late. You look back and realize the signs were obvious, but only after the damage is done. And deep down, there's a subtle fear you don't say out loud. The fear that no matter how smart or hardworking you become, you might still sabotage yourself without even realizing it. This isn't about discipline. It isn't about motivation. And it definitely isn't about intelligence. It's about how your mind lies to you in ways that feel completely logical. Every single day, your brain is making thousands of decisions for you. What to trust, what to ignore, what to fear, what to chase. And most of the time, it does this automatically, using shortcuts it learned long before you were aware of them. Those shortcuts once helped humans survive. Today, they quietly ruin relationships, careers, finances, and self-respect. If you don't learn to recognize these traps, you don't really choose your life. You react to it. We like to believe we are rational creatures, that we carefully think things through, that when we make a decision, it's based on facts, logic, and clear reasoning. But that belief is comforting fiction. In reality, the human mind is a master of justification, not truth. It decides first, then explains later. Think about how often you felt certain about something, only to be proven wrong. Not slightly wrong, completely wrong. Yet in the moment, it felt obvious, undeniable, rational. That's the danger. When thinking errors occur, they don't feel like mistakes. They feel like common sense. Your brain evolved for speed, not accuracy. Thousands of years ago, speed meant survival. If you heard a noise in the dark and assumed danger, you lived. If you paused to analyze and you were wrong, you died. That wiring still runs your mind today. The problem is, modern life doesn't reward fast emotional reactions. It punishes them. This is why you overreact to rare dangers and ignore common ones. Why dramatic headlines feel more important than quiet truths. Why confident people sound more convincing than accurate ones. Your brain is still operating as if everything is urgent and personal. One of the most powerful illusions we live with is the belief that more information leads to better decisions. We consume news, opinions, advice, and content endlessly, yet clarity feels further away than ever. The issue isn't lack of information. It's lack of filtering. Your mind doesn't want truth. It wants a story that makes sense. So it selects pieces of information that fit together smoothly and ignores the rest. Contradictions create discomfort. Uncertainty creates anxiety. So the brain resolves both by simplifying reality. This is why hindsight feels so convincing. After something happens, your mind instantly builds a clean explanation. Of course it failed. Of course it worked. Of course it ended this way. But before it happened, the outcome wasn't obvious at all. The brain just edits the past to feel in control. This illusion becomes dangerous when we confuse explanations with predictions. Being able to explain why something happened does not mean you could have predicted it. But your mind pretends it could have. That false confidence leaks into future decisions, making you trust yourself more than you should. Another subtle trap is outcome bias. We judge decisions by how they turn out, not by how they were made. If something works, we assume it was a smart choice. If it fails, we assume it was a bad one. But reality is messier. Good decisions can lead to bad outcomes. Bad decisions can succeed by pure luck. When you only reward outcomes, you train your mind to chase short-term wins instead of long-term clarity. You stop learning from mistakes because you label them as failures instead of information. Clear thinking requires evaluating the quality of your reasoning, even when the result hurts. Then there is the trap of consistency. We admire people who stick to their beliefs. We praise confidence and decisiveness. But consistency can easily become a prison. Once you've stated an opinion, chosen a side, or invested time and identity into something, your brain becomes emotionally attached to defending it. Changing your mind feels like weakness. Admitting error feels like failure. So instead of updating your beliefs, you defend them. You search for supporting evidence and ignore anything that threatens your position. This isn't dishonesty. It's self-protection. Clear thinking requires something most people avoid: the willingness to look wrong in the short term to be right in the long term. Numbers create another illusion. We trust statistics, percentages, and precise figures because they feel objective. But numbers don't speak for themselves. They are framed. And framing changes perception. A 90% success rate feels reassuring. A 10% failure rate feels scary. Same reality, different reaction. Your brain responds emotionally to how information is presented, not to its actual meaning. This is why advertising works. This is why political messaging works. This is why fear spreads faster than facts. Without awareness, you don't evaluate information. You absorb it. The human mind also has a deep need to see patterns. Patterns make the world feel predictable, controlled, meaningful. So we see them everywhere, even when they don't exist. We believe in streaks, lucky days, signs, and hidden rules. When something good follows a certain action, we assume the action caused it. When something bad happens, we search for someone or something to blame. Randomness feels threatening because it suggests a lack of control. So the brain invents control. This illusion becomes dangerous when we study success. We read stories of people who made it and assume their path contains a formula. We copy habits, routines, and mindsets, ignoring the thousands who did the same thing and failed. We confuse coincidence with causation and call it wisdom. Then there is social proof. If many people believe something, it feels safer to believe it too. If many people are doing something, it feels risky not to join. This instinct once protected tribes. Today it creates bubbles, trends, and collective blindness. Popularity starts to feel like truth. Confidence starts to feel like competence. Repetition starts to feel like evidence. Clear thinking often means standing apart just enough to think independently, even when that feels uncomfortable. Scarcity adds another layer. When something feels limited, rare, or about to disappear, your thinking narrows. Urgency takes over. You rush decisions. You stop evaluating. Fear of missing out replaces judgment. Sales tactics rely on this. Bad relationships rely on this. Poor life choices often begin with now or never. Clear thinkers slow down precisely when pressure tells them to hurry. Over time, all these illusions blend together, and something subtle happens. You begin to trust your intuition without question. Intuition feels powerful, immediate, certain. But intuition is only as good as the experiences that built it. If your past is biased, emotional, or limited, your intuition will reflect that. It will feel confident and still be wrong. Clear thinkers don't reject intuition. They question it. They ask where it comes from and when it might mislead them. At this point, something uncomfortable becomes obvious. Most people are not living consciously. They are reacting. They are defending beliefs they didn't choose, chasing goals they didn't examine, repeating patterns they don't understand. And this realization can feel unsettling, because it means the problem isn't out there. It's inside the way we think. But this is also where freedom begins. The moment you realize your mind is flawed, you gain power over it, not by eliminating errors, but by noticing them. Not by becoming emotionless, but by becoming aware. Clear thinking is not about being smarter than everyone else. It's about being less fooled by your own mind. This shift changes how you see yourself. You stop identifying with every thought. You stop defending every belief. You stop reacting to every emotion as if it were truth. You create space between stimulus and response. And in that space, better choices appear. You begin to ask different questions. Not how do I feel about this, but what evidence actually supports this? Not what do others think, but what would still make sense if no one were watching? Not how do I win, but what am I trying to optimize for long term? This awareness also turns inward, because the most convincing illusions are the ones we hold about ourselves. We believe we know our strengths and weaknesses, but self-knowledge is often self-flattery. When things go well, we take credit. When things go wrong, we blame circumstances. Slowly, this distorts feedback. We stop learning. We repeat mistakes with confidence. Clear thinking requires honesty without cruelty. Seeing yourself accurately, without turning self-awareness into self-hate. Another internal illusion is waiting for clarity before acting. We believe confidence comes first and action comes second. In reality, action often creates clarity. Waiting to feel ready keeps you stuck. Then there is the illusion of control. We like to believe we consciously steer our lives, but much of what we do is habit, environment, and momentum. This isn't weakness. It's how the brain conserves energy. Clear thinkers design their environment so good decisions become easier and bad ones become harder. They don't rely on willpower. They rely on structure. As this understanding deepens, something shifts emotionally. You stop needing to be right. You stop fearing uncertainty. You become calmer in not knowing, not because you've given up, but because you've stopped lying to yourself. This is where thinking stops being reactive and starts becoming deliberate. You also begin to notice how the world pulls on your mind. Advertising, media, authority figures, and even well-meaning advice use the same psychological levers: fear, desire, belonging, certainty. Clear thinkers pause before reacting. They ask who benefits from their fear, who profits from their urgency, who gains from their belief. This isn't about becoming cynical. It's about becoming conscious. The reward for this shift is subtle but powerful. Decisions become quieter. Regret becomes rarer. You waste less energy defending illusions and more energy building real progress. Life doesn't become easier, but it becomes clearer. And clarity, over time, compounds. From here, the ideas stop being abstract. Because clarity is not a philosophy. It's a daily practice, one that shows up in the smallest choices you make without noticing. Clarity shows up in moments that feel too small to matter. The pause before replying to a message. The hesitation before saying yes. The quiet doubt before following the crowd. These moments decide far more than dramatic turning points ever will. Clear thinking is built from simple mental habits, repeated consistently. Not grand insights. Not complex systems. Just disciplined awareness applied again and again. One of the most powerful habits is learning to subtract instead of add. Most people try to improve their lives by adding more information, more goals, more strategies, more opinions. Clear thinkers ask a different question. What can I remove? Which inputs distort my thinking? Which activities drain attention without providing value? Which voices create noise instead of insight? Reducing mental clutter sharpens judgment. Fewer inputs mean fewer biases fighting for control. This is why silence feels uncomfortable at first, but becomes addictive over time. In silence, the mind stops reacting and starts observing. Another habit is separating probability from possibility. Just because something is possible does not mean it is likely. The brain struggles with this distinction. It overweights vivid, emotional, or recent events and ignores base rates. A rare failure feels more important than a common success. A dramatic story outweighs boring statistics. Clear thinkers constantly ask, compared to what? How often does this actually happen? What usually occurs in similar situations over time? This shift alone prevents countless poor decisions driven by fear or excitement. Then there is the discipline of inversion. Instead of asking how to succeed, ask how to fail. Instead of asking what to do, ask what to avoid. This flips the brain out of optimism bias and forces it to confront reality. If you want a better career, ask what consistently destroys careers. If you want better relationships, ask what reliably ruins them. If you want peace of mind, ask what habits guarantee anxiety. Avoiding obvious failure is often easier and more effective than chasing vague success. Clear thinkers also understand the cost of opportunity cost. Every yes contains a hidden no. Every choice excludes countless alternatives. The brain naturally ignores this because it focuses on what is gained, not what is lost. When you say yes without thinking, you are silently saying no to time, energy, and focus elsewhere. Clarity comes from asking not just what you get, but what you give up. Another essential habit is delaying judgment. Most errors happen at the speed of emotion. Anger demands response. Excitement demands action. Fear demands escape. Clear thinkers build a buffer between feeling and deciding. They sleep on decisions. They revisit ideas later. They allow emotions to cool before committing. Time acts as a filter, removing impulsive noise and revealing underlying truth. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means acting deliberately instead of reflexively. Clear thinkers also build rules for themselves in advance. Rules remove the burden of constant decision-making. They reduce temptation, fatigue, and inconsistency. A rule might be never making major decisions while emotional, or never trusting advice from someone who doesn't face the consequences, or never checking news before completing deep work. These rules act as guardrails when clarity is hardest to access. There is also the habit of seeking disconfirming evidence. The mind loves agreement. It feels validating. But agreement doesn't sharpen thinking. Resistance does. Clear thinkers actively look for reasons they might be wrong. They ask people who disagree. They read opposing views, not to argue, but to test the strength of their reasoning. If an idea can't survive scrutiny, it wasn't solid to begin with. Another quiet discipline is accepting randomness. Not everything has a reason. Not every outcome carries a lesson. Sometimes things happen without meaning. Accepting this reduces unnecessary guilt and false confidence. Clear thinkers take responsibility for decisions, not outcomes. They focus on process, not perfection. This protects them from emotional swings and keeps learning intact. Over time, these habits reshape identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who reacts and start seeing yourself as someone who chooses. You stop chasing certainty and start valuing accuracy. You stop fearing mistakes and start extracting insight from them. Life begins to feel calmer, not because problems disappear, but because fewer problems are self-created. At work, you become harder to manipulate. You don't confuse urgency with importance. You don't mistake loud opinions for strong arguments. You don't chase every opportunity that flatters your ego. In relationships, you listen more than you defend. You notice patterns instead of isolated incidents. You choose compatibility over intensity. You stop romanticizing red flags just because they feel exciting. With money, you stop reacting to headlines. You stop believing in shortcuts. You understand that boring consistency beats dramatic moves. You respect risk instead of denying it. Most importantly, with yourself, you become more honest. You notice excuses forming. You catch rationalizations early. You question your own stories before they harden into beliefs. This doesn't make life dull. It makes it real. And something unexpected happens. As clarity increases, confidence follows. Not the loud, fragile confidence built on certainty, but a quiet confidence built on understanding limits. You become comfortable saying, "I don't know yet." You become willing to change your mind. You stop tying your identity to being right. This flexibility is strength. Clear thinking doesn't guarantee success. Nothing does. But it dramatically reduces unnecessary failure. It removes many of the invisible obstacles people mistake for fate. The world doesn't suddenly become fair, but it becomes more predictable. And predictability allows preparation. The ultimate goal is not perfection. It's fewer regrets. Fewer moments where you look back and think, "I should have known better." Because eventually, you do know better. Clarity is not a talent. It's a practice. One choice at a time. One pause at a time. One honest question at a time. And once you begin seeing your own thinking clearly, you gain something rare. Freedom from illusion. Freedom to choose your path with open eyes. Freedom to build a life guided by understanding instead of impulse. And that is a skill worth mastering.